All right, so for 11.3, we're going to talk about angles that are outside of the circle. The first one we're going to talk about is when we have tangents and a chord. So remember, tangents touch the circle at exactly 1 point. Those angles that are formed, that angle is going to be equal to 1/2 times the arc that it is intersecting or cutting off in the circle. And that's going to work every time you have a chord and a tangent connected to each other. So if we do a couple examples with that, this first example, line M is tangent to the circle. Find the measure of the red angle or arc. So this one, they want the measure of angle 1. So remember that angle would be equal to 1/2 times the arc length, or arc measure, which we said was 130. So then if we plug that in, we would get 65 degrees for that angle. Then for part B, they want the measure of arc KJL. So if we set it up the exact same way as before, that angle 125 would be equal to 1/2 the arc measure that we are looking for. So to get rid of the 1/2, we can just multiply both sides by 2, and that will give us our answer of 250 degrees for our arc. Okay, the second type of angle that we are going to have is when we have an angle outside the circle that's formed by either two rays or two tangents or two secants. So every time the angle is going to be outside the circle, that angle is going to be equal to 1/2 times arc minus arc. And we're always going to take the larger arc minus the smaller because we need a positive value for our angle. And that's going to work for every single one of these scenarios. So in this one, that angle outside the circle is going to be equal to the larger arc minus the smaller arc. Same thing if it looks like this third example, that angle outside is going to be 1/2 times the larger arc minus the smaller arc there. So it's very similar to our former equation. This time we are subtracting instead of adding though. So if we go to example 2, this one we have an angle outside the circle. So we have our angle equal to 1/2 times, and then we will take the larger arc, 178, minus our smaller arc, 76. Once we have that, you can type the whole thing into your calculator because X is already by itself. And when you do that, you should get the answer of 51 degrees for your angle. Next, we have example 3. Again, we have an angle that's formed outside the circle. This time we know what that angle is. So we're going to start with 30 equals 1/2 times, and then we're going to take the larger arc, A, minus the smaller arc, 44. Then we have to solve to get A by itself. So a lot of people said that this is how they would solve this equation, where they would multiply both sides by 2. Remember, when that happens, this 1/2 and the 2, those simplify and cancel each other out. So we don't have to do anything else on that side of the equation. We're just left with A minus 44, and then 30 times 2 is 60. Then to get A by itself, we can add the 44 on both sides, and that will give us our answer of 104 equals A. All right, we are going to skip example 4. I don't think we really need to go over that one for this section. And then for example 5, I would recommend pausing, trying this problem on your own, and then checking back for the answers. Okay, so for this problem, they want the measure of angles 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, so with these problems, I recommend just starting in order, and then if you find you need to skip one, you can. So if we start with angle 1, this is an angle formed by a chord and a tangent. So for that problem, we know that the angle is equal to 1/2 times the arc. And when you use the arc, you want to make sure it's the arc cut off by the entire angle. So if we extend this, the angle is going to go to point R. So to get that entire arc in this equation, we're going to have to do 100 plus 120. So 220 degrees is the arc that we are using. So the measure of angle 1 would be equal to 1/2 times 220. And that will give us 110 degrees. All right, then if we move on to angle 2, that is also a angle formed by a tangent and then a chord. So we're going to use that same formula, and again, you want to make sure you use the entire arc that it's cutting off. So we have to take 80 plus 60 to give us 140 degrees. So using that same formula, the measure of angle 2 would be equal to 1/2 times 140. And the measure of angle 2 would equal 70 degrees. And that makes sense because if we look at the angles 1 and 2, those two should be supplementary. They should add up to 180. So if we checked 110 plus 70, that does equal 180, meaning that we were able to do that problem correctly. Okay. Now for angle 3, this is an angle formed by two chords inside the circle. So when we have angles formed by two chords, remember that angle is equal to 1/2 times arc plus arc. So we would use the arc that's 100 and we would use the arc that's 60. Right, so then this one, the measure of angle 3 would be equal to 1/2 times 100 plus 60. Whoops, forgot my 0. There we go. And then we can just type that into our calculator. 1/2 times 100 plus 60. So because this one's inside the circle, we add. And the way I remember it is these kind of look like a plus sign where the angles meet inside the circle. So we would be adding for that. And that gives us measure of angle 3 being 80 degrees. All right. Then our next one, we have the measure of angle 4. So this is another angle formed by two chords. We can use that same formula. The measure of angle 4 equals 1/2 times arc plus arc. And this one we would be using 80 and 120. Because our angle is by itself, we're just going to type this into our calculator. This should be 100. Perfect. So that would give us 100 degrees for our last angle. So if you didn't get all those right, make sure you make changes. And again, if we look at this one where 3 and 4 are, those also should be supplementary angles and add up to 180. 80 plus 100 is 180, so that means we did all of the math on that problem correct. All right, so go ahead, work through the 11.3 homework. Make sure you are checking for what type of angles they are. We have some with those chords inside the circle that you will be using. With this one, a lot of people get stuck on this problem. So we know that this arc is 104, this one's 111, and then this one's also 104. You will have to find this arc here before you can find the measure of angle 1. And to do that, remember an entire circle is 360. A lot of people get stuck on that one. The problem number 10 is very similar, where you will have to first find that missing arc, and then you will have to solve for the angle. So if you don't have the numbers you need, you will find the missing part first, and then use your equation to find your answer. Those are typically the ones that I see people struggle with, so just try your best and then make sure you come to WIN sessions with questions.